Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the first, possibly last, depending on how this goes, podcast from Utility Week. My name is James Wallin. I'm the editor of Utility Week, and I'm joined by news editor Rob Horgan and our insights editor Tom Grimwood. Say hello, chaps.
Hello.
Hello, chaps.
Okay, so we're here to talk about Utility Week Live, which took place on the 20th and 21st of May. It was record attendances for the show across 6 stages of content. We're going to hear a few recordings that we took during the show. So we're going to be hearing from our keynote speaker who opened the show on day one, Greg Jackson, talking about various different things: locational pricing, ban on acquisition-only tariffs, and their new role as the biggest supplier of electricity and second biggest supplier of gas in the country. We're going to hear from Akshay Kaul, who's the Director General Infrastructure for Ofgem, who just come off the stage when Rob caught up with him. And then also Kayte O'Neill, who's the Chief Operating Officer of the Electricity System Operator, soon to be the National Energy System Operator, although not as soon as she may have hoped at the time of speaking, because as I mentioned before, an election was called just after that. So let's kick off with Mr. Jackson. Always puts on a good show. Made a nice joke at the start about this not being what he expected when someone asked him if he'd play the NEC. But he arrived, Rob, in a little bit of and left in a little bit of a whirlwind, didn't he?
Yeah, it was a bit of a rock star performance from Greg, I thought. I think he rocked up with, 2 minutes to spare before his session was due to start. Admittedly, that was because of delays to the trains, not his own tardiness.
Yeah. He wasn't doing a Madonna then.
No, not quite. But then, it kind of shocked me actually, was the reaction when he sort of came off stage and he was sort of mobbed by the audience.
He was. Yeah.
It was almost as if, I put it to him that it was like David Beckham was in the house, and he
agreed with that, didn't he?
He didn't disagree. Yeah, he kind of agreed and said, "Yeah, this is what it's like," which I thought was quite comical, and even to the point of getting this interview that I've done with him. We had to do it on the walk to the train station, but it just shows what a busy guy he is and how sort of well thought of he is in the industry. The fact that he got this reception, and I sort of had to smuggle him away. I always felt like his security guard smuggling him out of the show and off towards the train station for him to get on to his next gig. So.
Absolutely. Well, let's listen to a bit of that recording first of all. So it followed what was a wide-ranging presentation. I think it's fair to say you never quite know which direction Greg is going to go in, but he did touch on some of his favourite topics, including the various parallels that he provides for how customers are treated in other industries and how energy should follow their lead. Supermarkets are always kind of one that he goes for. He used a analogy about ukuleles being sold in Aldi, which I suppose kind of made sense. But locational pricing is one of his favourite topics.
Locational pricing is probably the single biggest move we can make to help fix the energy sector, the electricity sector for consumers. First of all, pricing would fall in every region. Scotland have the cheapest energy in Europe. Other regions would be among the cheapest in Europe too. After that, I think we've got consumers are able to respond to price signals. EVs will charge at the cheapest times; it'll be cheaper than ever. But also, in areas where you've got supply constraints, we can offer consumers, discounts or payments to move out of peak. We see that's incredibly popular, not just on the National Grid demand flexibility service, but for example, we do the opposite in some regions already, where we pay consumers, or we give consumers free electricity when there's a huge amount of solar generation concentrated in their area to help manage constraints on the network. So every stage, the more dynamism we introduce, the more we can engage consumers in delivering a lower cost, more efficient energy system with better utilisation of the infrastructure. Now, you asked about nodal versus zonal and so on. And I think, look, the most important thing is any form of locational pricing is better than where we are today. Today we've got the electricity equivalent of the old EEC wine lakes and butter mountains. And the closer we get the price signals to reflect the supply and demand in any given region, the more we eliminate that waste. Octopus would love to see the maximum degree of granularity, just so we get the most efficiency and the best price signals for people to react to. But any location price is better than we are today, and I think the key is to do it very, very quickly so that we don't make the wrong infrastructure decisions, and instead we can respond to how things are going. This isn't just about consumers. If you look at, for example, the demand for data centres, under locational pricing, Scotland would have the cheapest electricity in Europe, and by the way, other English regions and Welsh regions would do well too. And data centres could move to where they've got abundant, cheap, clean electricity, rather than being stuck in queues, unable to build in the areas of high demand as they are today. And investors can make the right investment decisions. For example, putting batteries where you've got constraints in demand as well as in supply. And so I think any form of locational pricing will be a huge improvement.
This followed on from obviously his presentation. I think when I asked him about this idea of Octopus being very keen on nodal pricing, government, veering more towards zonal pricing, I think he gave the analogy of when before the price cap came out, Octopus was a supporter of a relative price cap, which I believe I'm right in saying, Tom, that it caps the amount you can charge between your cheapest and
most expensive tariffs.
Exactly. Yeah. When the absolute price cap that Ofgem eventually came out, then they supported this one as well. So I guess this is him pushing for the best of worlds in his view, but ultimately being pragmatic. Now it's got a lot of critics, but any kind of locational pricing, right? So,
I mean, it's fair to say this is not probably the majority position in the industry. It's them, the ESO, the energy systems, Catapult, albeit they're very important parties in the industry, but there's a lot of people, certainly among kind of investors and developers of renewables who are quite opposed to this because of the amount of disruption that it would bring, which is a fair enough point if you're trying to invest for kind of years and years ahead, and you've got a kind of delicately balanced business case, then having all of your predictions about what prices you can expect thrown up into the air is probably going to be difficult. Although that said, from an academic economist perspective, I do see the value of zonal pricing in terms of the kind of improved efficiency that it would bring, and you can very obviously see the kind of use cases that he's talking about where it would make kind of new business models work where currently they don't.
Yeah. What do you make of his point that it has to be done quickly?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to imagine it being done quickly, particularly with nodal pricing. Yeah. But either way, it's a pretty massive overhaul of the system, and seeing how relatively minor changes to market arrangements seem to take kind of, if not months and months, then years. It's hard to imagine it's not going to take a while to put this into place. And that certainly seems to be what a lot of kind of external commentators have said, that we're not going to get any in many years of zonal nodal pricing before we get to the kind of target to decarbonise the power sector.
Yeah, I think 7 years, wasn't it? Was one of the figures bandied about for zonal pricing, for nodal pricing, presumably much greater. What about the another criticism that I put to him, I think on the stage was about the idea of this creating a kind of postcode lottery around the country. But I think he countered that with talking about that people are fairly comfortable with the idea that house prices fluctuate across the country. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly accept this for other things, and there's already a degree of regional variation in our energy pricing in terms of the network charges.
Absolutely, standard charge, yeah.
And I mean, if it's bringing down the cost of the overall system, then the kind of from my perspective at least, the distributional impacts of that can be kind of corrected for to some degree through kind of policy mechanisms. So I don't think that's a big enough reason not to do this, is because of it creating disparities. They can be corrected. I think the other points of contention are, I think, more important.
Wasn't Greg's point as well that even for the most expensive region, it would still be cheaper than
Yes.
it is right now?
Yeah. Okay, so Rob, do you want to explain what you went on to ask Greg about next? We covered quite a lot of topics. So.
Yeah, of course. So we've sort of followed up on another big point of his presentation, which I think you asked him more about in the Q&A afterwards, which is on the ban on acquisition-only tariffs and the possibility that Ofgem, or the likelihood that Ofgem is going to lift it later in the year. Octopus has already come out quite vocally against it. I think they described it as bringing back Del Boy tactics, or something along those lines. It seems to be the go-to phrase they've used a couple of times now. I think Greg actually said that.
I think
he
did.
himself.
No, never one to waste a catchphrase. And just a little bit of background for anybody not familiar with this. This was introduced as a temporary measure back in 2022, and essentially stops suppliers offering new customers a tariff that's not available to existing customers. Ofgem is consulting at the moment on lifting this either next March or in October, and its minded to position is that it should lift it in October. There was a consultation earlier this year in which the resounding response from suppliers and citizens' advice was that the ban should stay. The price comparison websites were the other people who responded. And unsurprisingly, they thought that it should go. So let's hear what Greg thought about this.
The energy market, to be fair, needs to have all deals available to all customers. And to be efficient, you want deals that reflect the physics of the system rather than, for example, business model choices, loss leaders to hook in new customers before fleecing them a year later. 91% of customers, according to a survey by another energy company, don't want to see the return of deals that are only available to new customers. It kind of seems crazy to me that you'd have a regulator promoting a world in which a price comparison site will ask you which energy company you're with. In fact, it will even know it the moment you put your address in, because you can look it up in a database, and then hide their best deals from you. And so I think transparency is everything, and that's the wrong step. We also got to remember that kind of world of turbocharged switching didn't create better value for 80% of customers. It created worse value for 80% of customers. And it led to 30 or so energy companies going bust, costing everyone £3 billion. We need to keep moving away from that world to a sustainable world where we deliver better value for customers through tackling the real problems in energy, which are the wholesale and transmission and distribution costs, the policy costs, not by coming up with terrible, loss-leading business models.
The other retailer that Greg mentioned there that conducted this survey was So Energy, and Simon Oscroft, their co-founder, was on the stage on the second day of Utility Week Live, along with Dan Norton from Ofgem. And just to summarise a little bit what Dan was saying there from the Ofgem point of view, he's saying that it's naive to assume that customers are not going to want to shop around primarily on price. He was also saying there is no real evidence that having the ban in place has driven any kind of innovation or kind of price competition. In fact, he pointed out that customer satisfaction has declined over that period. So there's very little evidence that retailers are looking at other ways to attract consumers. But yeah, Tom, this is this is a debate that's gone on for years in the energy retail sector, isn't it? About whether competition should be primarily on price, or whether there is a healthier version of competition that we can look at.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a lot of retailers have been kind of frustrated previously about everything just being focused on price, and it just pushing everyone to kind of focus on that over the quality of service. I think you can still have healthy competition on price and not have acquisition only tariffs. Greg kind of links them to the situation that we had that led to all those suppliers being shut down. But I think even if this ban had been in place, we still could have had that dynamic anyway. Although I don't think this was the cause of the previous dynamic. It probably doesn't help in resolving that and getting more of a focus on improving customer service and focusing on other things rather than just finding whatever is the cheapest tariff on there, regardless of what the other factors are.
Yeah. And I should also mention that Dan repeatedly said on stage that on that point around the financial resilience in of the sector, that Ofgem would put more measures in place so that suppliers have a healthier balance and have less reckless business models, so that situation couldn't repeat itself. He said, and of course there are far fewer suppliers in the market now as well. But Octopus itself has gone from strength to strength. So a couple of weeks before the show, they announced themselves as the UK's biggest supplier of electricity. Didn't make so much noise about gas, though, did they?
No, quite conveniently, they're still the second biggest supplier of gas, so they haven't quite overtaken British Gas on that front. But yeah, made no song and dance of that achievement.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't see it as an achievement, and that's why.
Well, I mean, okay, because Greg is on the record, isn't he, in the past as saying that he had considered stopping gas sales altogether. Now they didn't go down that route, but you did ask that as a cheeky last question, didn't you? So let's hear what he had to say.
Octopus's investment in heat pumps is probably the biggest of any energy retailer, and our drive to deliver them to people's homes through literally manufacturing and designing our own heat pumps, creating heat pump specific tariffs, smart controls to create better value from heat pumps, and to continually push for better regulations for heat pumps. All of that is Octopus's attempt to reduce demand for gas. And look, it's working. We are unable to keep up with demand for heat pumps at any part of our supply chain. We are recruiting thousands of engineers in order to be able to deliver this.
Just to clarify, that was the travelator again, not the sound of gas coming out of Greg's ears.
Well, he's kind of dodged the question there, hasn't he? Felicity,
yeah, he dodged it really well. And if we weren't on a travelator and just arrived at the station, I might have pushed him a bit harder on it.
But I mean, he could do it, couldn't he? He's now got an enormous amount of electricity customers. He could take a bold move. He could prove that they're still a disruptor and say we're not going to sell gas, couldn't they?
I'm not sure what that would achieve, really. I mean,
Well, it would achieve him being true to his values, I suppose, wouldn't it?
yeah, but it should make life harder for their customers because they're not all going to suddenly not be using gas, so they're just going to have to sign up with a different supplier for their gas. If he wants to push electrification, focus on getting people to adopt heat pumps and electric vehicles, and just sell them gas in the meantime. I don't really see the value of stopping doing that, other than just making more hassle for your customers, who probably might decide, a lot of them, that they're going to go with an entirely different supplier at that point. So yeah, seems a bit counterproductive.
Very possibly. But that takes us on to the topic of the future of heat. Something we have written about a lot, kind of ad nauseum, really, in terms of the electrification versus hydrogen debate. But it's still no clearer, is it, Tom, where we're going to get to?
The kind of mood music has been kind of away from hydrogen and towards electrification. We don't have anything firm, but we've had two of the the series of three trials that we were going to have, the neighbourhood, the village, the town. We now know don't have the village, we don't have the town, which is hardly a kind of vote of confidence in hydrogen, it would seem. I also remember some comments from Energy Minister Lord Callanan not that long ago, that he certainly didn't seem particularly convinced of the hydrogen case from what he said there. But I mean, you're right that it hasn't been ruled out yet, so the door is still open.
The only caveat to that, obviously, is we still don't really know what Labour thinks on
No,
hydrogen.
true.
They've been very quiet on it, haven't they? So.
Yep, absolutely. And I don't think we're going to get any kind of revelation during the election campaign. So we'll certainly have to wait until after the election to see who has formed the next government, to see what the approach to hydrogen is going to be. But yeah, all of the signals so far from the current government have been that they don't see certainly a significant role for hydrogen. But no decision has been reached, which leaves us in a period of uncertainty. And that means that Ofgem have got a very difficult job to do. They have the price controls for the gas networks coming up in 2 years' time.
April 2026, the next one
well,
start.
well remembered. And they're going to have to deal with this tricky problem of what's going to happen to the gas networks in that time. Are they going to be looking to prepare their infrastructure to carry hydrogen, or are they going to be looking to dismantle the network over time, or is it somewhere in between on that? So very difficult job for Ofgem to deal with, and it's something that Akshay Kaul, Director General of Infrastructure, talked about during his session, and you caught up with him afterwards, didn't you, Rob? So you talked to him about a few things, but yeah, future of heat came up quite prominently.
There is a very basic decision on heat, which is what role is hydrogen going to play in home heating, which at the moment we're currently expecting in 2026 from the government according to their timetable. We would certainly encourage the government to make that decision by 2026, and if they can make it earlier, then the earlier they make it, the better, because it gives clarity, to both the gas and the electricity sectors on how to plan for investment, because heating is a big part of the gas demand right now, big part of the energy usage in the economy right now. And the question of how you decarbonize that, I think, is absolutely fundamental to how much electricity we're going to need, and therefore how much electricity infrastructure we're going to need on the transmission and the distribution grids. It's also fundamental to how much hydrogen infrastructure we're going to need.
He talked a bit more about this during the session, didn't he? He came up very strongly for an earlier.
Yeah, I think he's given more of a political answer, I guess, there in that interview I did with him. But during the session, he was definitely calling for a decision as soon as possible. I think he said, or as quickly as possible. And he said Ofgem is putting pressure on government to do that if it can, which I think is the first time they've come out and said that.
I think so, yeah.
That they're not. Yeah. Which I'm sure, well, it upset some people in the audience anyway. He got immediately asked if that was a bit premature and that was going to spark debate about decommissioning of the gas networks, and I think that's probably why he rode back slightly in that interview there.
Yeah, I got similar responses when I talked to people from the gas networks. I think if PERDA hadn't been announced that afternoon, I think Akshay might have been forced into a bit of a quiet period anyway from the reaction he got to those comments. But I think basically the response that I got from the gas networks was, well, how can you make a decision? There isn't the evidence base. There are huge gaps in the plan for electrification. There are questions that need to be answered about properties or areas that aren't suitable for a heat pump. You mentioned before, Rob, it's not clear what Labour think, what their policy is. But I mean, I think when they if they get into power, I would expect them to be much bolder, I think, in tackling those uncomfortable topics, because I think the likelihood is they're going to get in with a majority. I think they've made energy front and centre of their campaign, and you can't really talk about decarbonisation without having a stance on decarbonisation of heat. It's a huge element of emissions. It will also be interesting to see. National Infrastructure Commission has been very vocal about that. Labour have also talked about its plans for what it wants to do with that organisation, so merging it, potentially giving it a bit more clout. I could see, somebody like Sir John Armitt being quite influential in a Labour government. Now he's been pretty unequivocal on his views on hydrogen for heat. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. One of the key players in that debate is going to be the as yet unborn National Energy System Operator. Now, we discussed this at Utility Week Live as well. We're lucky enough to have the Chief Operating Officer of the ESO, as it is at the moment, Kayte O'Neill, on the stage, and I caught up with her after her presentation just to talk a little bit about the first 100 days of NESO. I should say that this was recorded before the election was announced, so that will impact the time frame she's talking about.
I think we've been really clear from the start that NESO from day one will make a step change on behalf of industry in a number of really key areas. The one that gets talked about most at the moment is our role in strategic energy planning, whether that's our contribution towards a strategic spatial energy plan, so really taking a big step back and nationwide saying what are the big sort of generation and storage decisions that we need to make, what does that mean for sort of corridors of transmission, and really, really importantly, engaging with communities and stakeholders right from the outset of those planning processes as we think about what a spatial plan for GB should look like. But of course, it's not just the strategic planning work. We'll take on some immediate new roles in gas market planning and gas network needs analysis. That's an area where we're really scaling up our capability and capacity in the organisation, working really closely with gas, hydrogen, CCUS stakeholders right across the sector to make sure that we can make a really useful contribution from really early on in that space. The other area that I'll just call out as a sort of an immediate area of focus is around resilience and security of supply. I think events in recent years have really shone a spotlight on the need for a much more whole systems approach to thinking about our energy security and resilience. And again, that's an area where from day one, from year one, we'll have accountabilities to deliver in support of government on that. Looking ahead, of course, there are question marks still about some of the future roles and exactly how they will play out. Very hot topic at the moment is the future of flexibility, and in particular how we think about the role of a market facilitator for flexibility. What I would say on that is sort of irrespective of who picks up the market facilitator role, and I do think NESO is a good candidate for that, but irrespective of who takes the role, we have clear activities underway today to really amp up how we're thinking about flexibility market design, what is needed in the flex market space, how do we engage right across the sector to really progress and move things forward in that area. And then I think the other one that again will evolve over the remainder of this year is regional energy strategic planning. We know that there is a role for NESO there, but as Ofgem concludes its detailed design work and hands that over to us later in the year, sort of the full extent of that role, I think, is still to be played out. So I probably just finish by saying, huge progress to be made sort of on or around day one and immediately thereafter. Very much an evolving role for ESO over time, NESO over time. But we're really looking forward to it, and we're building that capacity and capability now to get ready for that future.
So just a quick point on day one itself. We're not exactly sure when day one is going to be. It was originally going to be July the 1st. That ambition was then changed to be summer. Interestingly, even before the election announcement, when we were on stage, Kate was saying, very keen to get this done in summer. But then when I asked Theresa Kamey from DESNZ, who's been the person leading on the NESO project for government, she was much more circumspect and saying this year. But you just hear, Tom, don't you, the list of roles that NESO is going to perform, those functions that it's going to have. and it seems pretty critical to get that organisation up and running and start delivering some of those rules pretty soon.
Yeah, there's so many different bits of work in different parts of the industry that are dependent on them delivering. The RESPs being the one that she finished on, and a kind of an excellent example of this. It's still pretty vague what the NESO's role is going to be in that regard. Ofgem has said they're going to set up the RESP or a series of RESPs, but quite how much that means, what exactly that means in practice is not entirely clear yet. But yeah, that's going to have an incredibly important role when it comes to making decisions around heating that we've been discussing, and determining what investment networks are doing. Particularly in kind of instances where there are local plans to focus on particular things, and that's just one of those, and that's going to be an incredibly complex role, having to speak to dozens and dozens of local stakeholders, local authorities, the networks in the area, both gas and electricity, businesses, community groups, and kind of sucking in information from all of them to come to a view that works for everyone, or at least everyone else can work too. So yeah, there's a lot for them to do, it seems.
Yeah, and she mentioned there the market facilitator role. Now that's one where, an unusual one, this isn't it, because Ofgem initially had kind of earmarked, I think, NESO or the FSO at that point for this role. But then after they got a bit of pushback on that assumption, they went and reconsulted, looking at whether it should be NESO or Elexon to take on that role. Now we were expecting an update on that. We weren't expecting a decision from Ofgem pretty soon. Of course, that's now going to be pushed to the back, past the election. But I guess this is a toss-up between overloading a nascent organisation like NESO, or asking somebody like Elexon that might perhaps not have the technical skills to do this, to take on this job. So a tough ask for Ofgem there, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah. It did at one point seem like they were just any job that they could have someone else to do.
Yeah,
they were just
the
handing
NESO
it, get the NESO to do it, and have them fill in the blanks and do all the difficult jobs that we don't have anyone else to do. I mean, I can kind of see why, aside from the kind of issues around competency, why you might want to have someone on other than the NESO doing this, seeing as they're also going to be subject to the decisions that are made by this market facilitator. They're one of the buyers of these flexibility services in the same way that the DSOs are. So from there's also kind of that motivation for doing this as well. I don't know what's happening with that decision now, and presumably that's on hold.
that will be on hold now, I think, until after the election. I think it's very difficult for Ofgem to be able to come out with something like that. I think it's quite fanciful to think that the election is going to be swung on whether a market facilitator role goes to Elexon or NESO, but there you go. Okay, I think we've come to the end of our time for this. We've gone beyond our time for this podcast. Really, Rob told me at the start that we'd only get about 15 minutes out of this, but we've done well. We've been wanging on for ages, haven't we? And in the unlikely event that you enjoyed this and you want us to do more, then please do. Please do tell us. Yeah, if you're still listening to the end. But thank you for downloading or whatever you did to this to get this podcast. Can you tell it's my first one? And yeah, keep reading Utility Week.